Right then, here we go. So we'll be looking at homesteaders this time. Again, I'm going to focus on these four questions. So primarily, why did homesteaders go west in the first place? The problems, solutions, and the impacts. Now, they went west for a number of reasons. Primarily, the US government had much more land. So they purchased, for example, the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, that huge band of land you can see there in the middle. And also, one of the most important things, the US government passed the Homestead Act 1862, which gave 160 acres of land to anybody who would settle and farm the land. They also passed two more subsequent acts, the Timber Culture Act and the Desert Land Act, which gave them much more land. Now, there's other things that helped. Also, the end of the Civil War, particularly for black people. They were free slaves, but nothing to do when they were freed. So what can they do? So a lot of them up sticks and moved to the Midwest as homesteaders. And also soldiers who'd been demilitarised thought, well, okay, I've seen blood and war and everything else, I fancy a new start as well. So again, they went west. Another big reason why homesteaders went west was primarily because the railroads enabled them to travel very, very quickly from a station in the east. Literally the next day we turn up in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska or Iowa or somewhere like that, and that enabled them to take all their stuff with them. Now, the kind of questions in the exam will focus primarily on problems they faced, and you can see some of those here. Sod houses, ploughing the land, how they solved their problems with barbed wire and things like that. So I'm going to go through in detail all those things. Just going to go back to why people. Where's the page up? There we go. Why people also went west. There's a number of religious reasons, like Jewish people, Amish people wanted to escape persecution, and also a huge number of European immigrants as well, from Scandinavia in particular, from UK. So look on page 84 of the book, that will tell you more information about that. So this is the type of question, the E question, 10 marks. So what problems did the homesteaders face on their arrival? How did they solve their problems? Or solve these problems? Now, that's quite an easy question. It's just trying to remember it all. That's the difficult bit. Remember, you must rank it. The worst problem they faced was whatever. So remember to rank it. That is the key thing to get level 4, 9 to 10 marks. And then we're just going to go through these. So the first, well, you could say the most important problem was water. Water was scarce, so it was very difficult to irrigate crops and to keep themselves and their houses clean. How did they solve that problem? Well, Joseph Halliday invented this. You can see the picture there, the windmill, and it changed direction with the wind, and it enabled water to be pumped up from ground level. The second thing was the weather extremes. The Indians had moved from place to place. So, for example, in the summer they'd move north because get away from the oppressive heat. The homesteaders were in one spot. One of the main problems was it destroyed their crops. It was too hot, too arid, or sometimes too much rain. How did they try and solve this problem? Well, they came up with things like dry farming. And dry farming meant during a heavy rainfall they'd literally just plough the land. That would trap the moisture in the soil and help irrigate the crops. Third problem they faced was a lack of fuel. There's very little wood, no trees because of the wind, so they solved that problem by using chips or buffalo dung as fuel. Not very pleasant but very effective. The fourth problem was dirt and disease. They were living in sod houses, mice, insects, all those kind of things also lived in there and loved it. So obviously their proximity to humans meant it was very, very difficult and disease spread easily. How do they solve that? Well, really it's related to water. Clean water enabled them to keep themselves clean, but in no way was it perfect. Now the building materials, a lack of wood, they just solved that problem by using sod. Now it wasn't an ideal solution, but in the short term it worked very well. It was cheap, effective and quick to build. However, over the long term, if they could afford it, they transported wood on the railroads from the east. Natural hazards, things like fire, plagues of grasshoppers, that type of thing. Really there was no solution to that problem. And in the end, really, the modern day we'd use pesticides, but at that time homesteaders had no solution to that problem, so there really was the lap of the gods. Ploughing the land was very tough. They'd never been ploughed before. Really, really difficult. So what happened there was John Deere invented his sod buster, and that really ground up the land for the first time. There was all these tangled roots, very, very difficult, and that was a very effective way to do that. How could they protect their crops they were growing? Because wandering buffalo will get trampled, that type of thing. Well, Joseph Glyden or Glidden, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, basically invented barbed wire, and that obviously stopped wandering herds of buffalo trampling on their things. How could they grow crops? Well, the problem was the extreme weather. So they came, or some of the people who came over were from Russia, and they brought with them this hard winter wheat, which enabled them to grow in very Siberian sort of temperatures. So that was very effective in helping them there. But primarily, they solved their problems by really working hard, working as hard as they could, and new machinery. They often also, when their grain crops grew a surplus, that enabled them to sell and buy new machinery, which helped them going forward. So really, that's a quite straightforward question. It's just trying to remember all of those things: problems, solutions. Okay, let's turn this bad boy off. How do we do that?